Good evening. I want to talk tonight about Swinton's water supply. Now, for any community to survive, a reasonable, clean water supply is absolutely an essential ingredient of public health. Many communities of the world, of course, don't have that. Water is something we very much take for granted. We turn the tap on, out comes the water. We trust it to be clean, we trust it to be pure, and also we trust that it's continuous, it's there when we want it. It's not always been that way. In fact, early Swinton, most of the community grew up around different areas of water supply. Now, I'm standing on Milton Street here, very busy Milton Street tonight as well by the traffic that's going by. But I'm in a little recess just off Milton Street, and we can just pan around and many people wonder why this little recess is here. Well, there's a very good reason for that, and the reason is the area is actually the town well. It was always called Town Well, and in fact Milton Street, its original name was Well Lane. So just to my left here is a capped medieval well, and with it being the town well, it was one of the principal supplies of water for the area. Now, a few years ago, when work was taking place, we actually had the well revealed, and I can just show you a photograph here in this corner. If you just look to the back, to the ground, the well is capped, but you can see the stonework that forms the well shaft going down. It's quite deep. It's all stone lined, obviously to sort of protect the cleanliness of the water. So a few years ago we actually were able to get an image of something that's never usually seen. So this recess on Milton Street, originally called Well Lane, was the town with a medieval town well. Behind the wall there is some remains of some pipe work, which indicates how the water supply was tapped into in later years. Now, pretty much up until late Victorian times, people in Swinton relied for their water supply on a series of springs, of wells, of drains. In fact, the Brookfield drain, which is not too far away from here, hence you get the name Brookfield Avenue, the Brookfield drain was actually open to the elements at the bottom of what we now is Temperance Street. So people would go and draw their water from that point in the dip at the bottom of Temperance Street. It's now, of course, it's culverted, it's run underground, the stream is covered, and that drains right the way down into the River Don. In fact, behind the Robin pub, there was a group of houses actually called Spring Yard, which shows that they existed around a spring. That was their water supply. When water became contaminated, that's when you've got problems, because many diseases such as cholera are waterborne. Water is the vector which carries the disease, and in Spring Yard, in that area, there were about 24 deaths in one period of time when the water supply was indeed contaminated. So Brookfield Ditch is supplied by a whole series of springs all the way down this end of Swinton. A good evidence is in the former garden of Milton House, now in the Little Woodlands. There's a natural spring there which they've formed a garden pond, but originally a trough actually took water from that pond to actually feed Swinton's old hall, Swinton's old medieval hall. Again, was a good supply of water, and that spring seems to run all year round, despite of dry spells. Another area where people drew their water from was the dyke, which runs from Thomas Street, and again it runs along Bow Broom, and again with that water supply, hence houses came in that particular area as well. And another natural spring existed and still exists on the site of Swinton Pottery near the Woodman, and again a cluster of accommodation. The Swinton Pottery wouldn't have even been sited there had it not been for that natural continuous supply of water essential for industrial production of the ceramics on that particular site. We couldn't rely, as Swinton moved forward from a small village into a Victorian boom town, you just could not rely on these natural drains and streams and wells wherever they were, and also the knowledge about clean water was increasing all the time. So you also, in addition to the water supply, you have to deal with the sewage problem. And a rising human population inevitably means you have to deal with that sewage problem. Also, agriculture further upstream, cows in fields, water, manure would run into the streams and again cause contamination further down, causing diseases for people. So you had to deal with this, and the Victorians certainly knew how to deal with that. So we then got quite a lot of infrastructure taking place. And it wasn't always easy in Swinton to create that infrastructure. I'm going to show you a photograph now of this photograph is actually of an early reservoir which just existed at the bottom of what is now Racecourse Road. You can see the cows here. But this water tower here was known as Swinton Water Tower. And that there was a reservoir quite just above the gate pub at the bottom of Racecourse Road. The land's still open there, so you can see that was part of the water infrastructure to sort of pump water. And water to the top end of Swinton had to be pumped over mechanisms in this particular building, which existed there. So the Gating Reservoir was created in 1883. And that was really the first time that piped water was available to properties in Swinton, and only certain numbers of them as well. And it was only available sometimes for 12 hours a day because the infrastructure just could not cope with demand. So for 12 hours a day, you had to. There was no water came from your taps. Later infrastructure was created, and I want just to mention a contribution of an engineer. This gentleman here really does deserve credit. His name was Robert Fowler, and Robert Fowler was appointed engineer in Swinton from 1894 to 1909. Before he became a municipal engineer, Robert worked on railways all throughout Yorkshire and Lancashire. And he settled in Swinton, and he created Wathwood Reservoir, which actually enabled a water supply for the houses and properties right at the top of Swinton in the Woodman area, a reliable source of water supply. But Robert also greatly improved the sewage system of the town. So actually, Robert, he's responsible for saving many lives in effect, because to get the sewage away and avoid that contamination, we do owe a debt to Robert Fowler. He died in 1939. He's actually buried in St Margaret's churchyard with his family. When he did retire, he became a councillor in Mexborough for a period of time. So Robert Fowler, engineer, responsible for Wathwood Reservoir and many sewage improvements. The area around Piccadilly, in 1912, another well was sunk at Piccadilly, and again a pumping station was there right at the bottom in the dip of Piccadilly Road, and that's located now where Kew Close is. So in that area was another water infrastructure. Before we get there, though, another well was sunk at the bottom of Workley Avenue, and if we look at this photograph here. This is Workley Avenue, and right at the bottom we see this big chimney, and that well, that was again a pump and a well, and that happened in 1882. So getting ready to supply all these properties with piped water, and that exists there on the site of Mulberry Manor nursing home now, right at the very bottom of Workley Avenue. So taking us back from the medieval town well to where we are today, obviously that water is a very heavy commodity. It takes a lot of carrying. It's not the easiest thing to carry. It's exhausting work. and so therefore proper buildings and society and communities need to be near that source of water. So that does give a little bit of illustration as how the springs and the wells, because they existed where they existed, that's where the buildings took place, until such time as we had great improvements in the Victorian era to both our precious water supply and our sewage system. So very much taken for granted, but not everyone in the world is as fortunate as we are. We can just turn on a tap and there we have the fresh, clean water. So thank you very much, and see you next time.